remember that moment. I find it's amazing. A lot of people can remember that moment. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honour and a privilege for me to introduce you to someone who I got to know during lockdown. He spoke at the Bouncing Forwards book launch, and it's just blown me away. And very kindly also met me on Zoom because I had lots of questions. And he's a real inspiration to all of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, please will you give a massive warm welcome to Terry Waite, CBE. Well, I think they're quite pleased you're here. And when you came up there, I thought, you know what? If he falls, he survived Lebanon and Beirut, and he's going to fall at the Kintsugi conference. That is not going to be very good for me. Terry, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. It's such an honour and a privilege. We heard a little bit of your story there on the video, but tell us a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. What was captivity like for you? What were the conditions that you were living in that time?
Well, as you know, I was actively engaged during those days in seeking the release of people who'd been captured, who were held illegally, and whose families were in great distress. And it's a difficult and dangerous work. Just by the by, just before I come directly to your question, tomorrow I shall be meeting 72 members of one family, because years ago, John and Audrey Coleman, John was a doctor working in Iran, his wife was with him, they were captured, and Jean Waddell, who was secretary to the bishop, was held in the Aveen prison, and I managed to get into the Aveen prison where Nazarene Ratcliffe was held in, and well, to cut a long story short, I brought them all home. But tomorrow, the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren have never seen their great-grandparents, obviously. And so I'm going to meet with them and tell them the story of their great-grandparents or their grandparents, and we'll meet, have lunch together. But that's just one aside. But if you do that work, you know that you stand in danger of being either killed or captured. And you don't let it dwell on your mind. But if you don't take into account that, then you are rather foolish. Eventually I was captured, and if anybody wants to read about that, it's all written in the book that I wrote. I spent almost 5 years in total solitary confinement, often underground, always with no light, no natural light, sometimes a candle, sometimes electric light. I was chained by the hands and feet to the wall. Now, here's an interesting thing. Looking on the internet one day, I came across an advertisement, and it said, would anyone wish to buy the radiator which Terry Waite was dead?
How much did it go for?
I was never chained to a radiator. I was always chained to staples driven into the wall. I slept on the floor. I had no books or papers. When anyone came in the room, I had to wear a blindfold over my eyes. And so it was a situation of quite strict lockdown, you can put it that way.
Yeah. And I remember when we were talking previously at the book launch that you visited Albatross, didn't you, before that? And I remember you saying, "Oh my goodness, I could never go through anything like that." And then there you were.
Well, you never know until you actually experience a difficulty. You often say, "Oh goodness, I could never face that. I could never deal with it." But then when you get into the situation, or a situation of difficulty, you often find that you have resources within you that you never knew you had. And you can call on them. I give one example. When about 3 years into captivity, they came into my room and said, "You have 5 hours to live." And I thought my end had come. And I was afraid. But I simply lay on the floor and fell asleep. And it's a strange thing. It's as though my body was coming to my aid and supporting me in that time of real stress and real strain. And the same when I was tortured. Many people have been tortured far more than myself. But although it was extremely painful, somehow one found one had resources to bear it and still feel a pity and a sympathy for the person who was committing that act. I've written about it. May I just read a little?
Yeah, of course.
This will give you an idea of... I need my glasses.
I've already got mine on.
They came at night, footsteps in the corridor, a key turning as fear grips my stomach. I lie still on the floor, blindfolded, sheltering beneath my thin blanket, seeking protection, seeking what scrap of security I may find. "Sit!" The command echoes round the cell like a shot from a pistol. Chains tug at my limbs as I struggle to obey. My wrists and feet are seized as locks are removed. "Stand!" I stumble to my feet. What is happening? Why at this hour do they come? Can this be release? Do I stand on the brink of freedom? My arms are gripped as we move out of the cell into the unknown. There are many in the room. I hear laughter, words uttered in a half whisper, words I cannot understand. "Sit!" I crouch and sit. "Sleep!" I lie on my back. The room falls silent. "What you say?" Now I understand. Another bout of questioning, another seeking for answers I cannot give. "What you say?" The voice is louder, insistent. "Nothing," I reply. "Nothing." Something lands on my face, a pillow perhaps. I struggle to breathe as the pillow is held down. "What you say?" Someone holds my legs. Now my fear increases. The room falls silent. Suddenly, a searing pain convulses my body. My feet are burning as blow after blow is struck with cable. "What you say? What you say?" I cry into the covering. "Oh God, let this pain cease. What manner of person could so treat another human being to such indignity and pain?" "Stand!" I cannot. Arms lift me to my feet and drag me back into chains, back into the night, back into a living death.
When we hear stories like yours, because presumably it was such a long time, how did you just cope with that sense of uncertainty? Because presumably you didn't know if you would be released, if you'd be killed. It was uncertain. You had no idea what was going on.
We do live today in very, very uncertain times. And anxiety amongst ordinary people is increased, no doubt about it. And the cases of mental illness and indeed of suicide have risen. Indication that life is getting very hard and very tough for many people. I suppose I coped with it in the following way. Well, a number of ways. Let me just give a couple of examples. Sure. I was often in the dark, and if I was in a room in a bombed-out building upstairs, metal shutters were put in front of the window so no light came in. And yet in the early morning, when the sun rose, it would always find a chink in the shutter, and the beam would come into the room, and it would gradually illuminate the room. And I remember saying to myself, hold on, light is stronger than darkness. Hold to the light. And then there was another occasion when I had one visit to the bathroom a day. And it was a very primitive bathroom, and again I was on the 3rd or 4th floor of a bombed-out building. And up high on the wall, there was a window which was normally covered by a wooden shutter, which was locked. One day I went in there, and the lock was removed. It had been left open. And I hadn't seen outside of myself for years. I hadn't seen another human being for years. And I clambered up and I looked down on the street below. And there was a lady walking along with a large bunch of flowers. And it was the first time in years that I'd seen colour. And I thought to myself, how wonderful. It's so marvellous to see colour, and it's all around us. And even in the midst of when we're feeling depressed, we're still surrounded by that which is beautiful from God's creation. It is there. Hold on to these things, hold on to the light. Appreciate. It's often the small things in life that are the most significant. And then, I suppose, I never felt what some people do feel and claim to feel, the close presence of God. I didn't feel that. And I think it's very dangerous often if you depend solely on feeling. Because bad feeling, if you like, can be occasioned by illness, by a variety of things. So don't rely entirely on feeling. If you don't have feeling, don't think, well, God has left me. That's not necessarily the case at all. I never felt the close presence of God. But what I could say in the face of my captors was, you have the power to break my body. And you've tried. You have the power to bend my mind, and you've tried. But my soul is not yours to possess. In other words, I'd be very difficult to give you a precise definition of soul. In that context, I meant the total person that I am. And whatever you do, you will never take that, because it lies in the hand of God. And that's a very, very simple belief, I admit. It's not sophisticated. It's not bound by doctrines and dogmas. It's just a very simple belief. And that simple belief was enough to enable me to maintain hope. And there's a key. If you can be with somebody, or even if you can find it within yourself, hope, then that is part of the key of existing.
And I remember last time that we did an event together online is we were talking about hope. And I know that we were talking about hope and optimism being two different things. You can be optimistic about the weather. Well, in this country sometimes it's quite nice today. But hope is so much deeper, and that's losing hope is one of the darkest things that can happen to you. But even within your story, you kept hold of hope.
Yes, and that happens today. I mean, I firmly believe that we live, it's obvious, we live in a world full of suffering. And suffering is no respecter of persons. Just before I came up here, I was talking to someone whose father was a Japanese prisoner of war. And I was particularly interested because I've been a patron of the prisoners of war for many, many years. And anybody who knows the families of prisoners of war will know that those children and the families went through very difficult times, not just during the captivity, but in the period after, when they came home. And that remained with them. No fault of their own, but their suffering is faced there. And I would go along with that and say that in the vast majority of instances, suffering need not destroy. Because out of suffering, it is often very possible for something creative to emerge. Now, looking back on my experience, I wouldn't wish, obviously not, to go through the experience again of captivity. But in a strange way, I don't regret it, because I was able to discover more about myself, and I was able then to say, well, look, take that experience, use it, and, well, for example, Hostage International, which I founded, exists today to support hostages. Emmaus for the Homeless, another work with overseas students. Now, I would have never in the past given up a salaried job and said, give yourself to this work. Without that experience. And that's just my own. And there are many, many better examples, I'm sure, amongst people who are here, who've said, yes, they've had real suffering in life, but they've been able to take it and make something creative from it.
Some people say that hope is dangerous. I don't want to get my hopes up because I don't want to be disappointed. So then they live without hope because of the fear of disappointment. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say, if you're always looking for something better or bigger or greater, well, it might happen, but that's not somehow, by always doing that, you're missing the point of life. Life, as I said, I think I said on that little clip, life is for now, this moment. At this moment, at this very moment in time, everybody here, the most important people in my life and in your life, we're together. We matter. This is our life now. And somehow we've got to get that understanding. It doesn't mean to say you don't think about tomorrow. It doesn't mean to say you don't plan for tomorrow. Of course you do. But we have to live in the future, in the present now. And that's part of the secret. Have your hopes, yes, but live now.
And we've been talking about a lot of that today, about being fully present in the moment.
Yes.
Is absolutely crucial. And we've got a lot of questions asking around, obviously, whenever you go to an audience like this, people want to hear your story. Is it hard to relive it so many times? Because you obviously went through such a traumatic experience, and everyone wants to hear it again.
Well, people have said to me, is it therapeutic? Are you still going over it for personal therapeutic reasons? I don't think so now. Now, in the first year after captivity, I had a fellowship in Trinity Hall, Cambridge, and I used that time to write the book. I put down on paper the book I'd written in my head during those years of captivity. And people said at the time, is that a therapeutic exercise? I said, oh, no, I don't think so at all. I was mistaken. It was a therapeutic exercise.
Saves a lot of money for me. I don't know about you.
It actually enabled me to put on paper and objectify and deal with an unpleasant experience. And I would say then that by talking about it now, why I'm glad to talk about it now is because I know for a fact that people who have been still experiencing difficulties, have been able to take this experience and say, right, I can turn things around, I can move things on.
Yeah, definitely.
And I find now that if I go and meet with the homeless, as I do very regularly in the mass for the homeless, they're very glad to talk because they say, you know what it's like to be kicked around, to have nothing. You know what it's like. And we don't have to explain anything. So there are many gifts coming from a situation of difficulty.
A lot of people asking in terms of when you came back, adapting back to life, what was that like? Is it an ongoing process? How did you deal with that?
Well, again, here, just as I was at the back, with Jenny, my PA, and we were just putting a few books out, which I've written. A lady said, she came to me and she said, and she's someone here, I don't know where you are now, but she came to me and she said, one of the most helpful things you said in the past was if you're coming out of a situation of trauma or difficulty, take it as though you're coming up from the seabed. If you come up too quickly, you've been diving and you come up too quickly, you get the bends, you get nitrogen in the blood, and you're very ill. If you take it gently, the chances are you'll be fine. And that's the same sort of advice I would give to anybody who's been through a period. Don't rush things. Don't think, I'm going to make up now for all those years lost and do everything quickly. Often you can't cope with that and you break down. Step by step, gently, gently. In other words, go gently.
I think that'd be a great name for a conference, Terry. I think you're onto something there. Definitely. When you were in that captivity, how did you feel towards your captors? And when you left captivity, did your feelings change towards your captors?
Well, there's an amusing story to begin with. I would say to my captors, initially, when I was first captured, does it not say in the Quran, you mustn't steal? Oh, no, we mustn't steal. How is it you steal me from my family? You steal my life. So they thought for a moment and they said, we'd better go and ask the chief about that. So a couple of weeks later they came back and I said, what did the chief say? They said, the chief said, we mustn't talk to you anymore. Now that is perfectly true story. The thing is this, that there was another story when many of you remember the name of John McCarthy, with whom I'm still in regular touch. We're doing something together very shortly. John McCarthy, Brian Keenan, they were kept together and the food became very bad Poorly. And they complained, and nothing happened. And after a few months, the head man came to see them, and he said, what are you getting? They told him. He said, that's not right. He wasn't without honor. So he looked into it, and he discovered the old story. The guard who'd been given money to buy food had practiced the old trick, pocketed half the money, spent half on food. So they took that guard outside and they shot him. Because they said, if you betray us in small matters like that, you'll give the whole group away. Now, many of these young men, every terrorist group, and I've worked with many over the years, has within it people who you might term to be psychopaths, psychopathic disposition. They're there, and they are almost impossible to deal with. That's not true of the whole group. Often there are young people who are drawn into these groups, young people who've been the bottom of the pile, religiously, ethnically, socially, politically. A charismatic leader comes along and says, join us, fight for your rights, you'll find everything fine. Suddenly they have a status, suddenly they have a role and a purpose, but there's no escape. And that's the same dynamic, group dynamic, that is operative in gangs that we see around the country today, in drug gangs. Youngsters drawn into a drug gang, and once they're in, they're lucky to get out. And often, many of them are injured or killed. Same dynamic. So you ask me how I feel. I feel that I say to myself, if I'd been in a position where I was born in the same situation some of these lads were born, there's a chance I may have been with them. Now that does not mean to say for one moment, not for one moment, I condone their activities. And I've told them so directly, I do not. But the difference between agreeing and condoning something and understanding why. And that's the question to ask when you come across this difficult behavior, bad behavior, frankly criminal behavior. I think you need to be able to say, why? Why is he doing that? What is the reason?
And I think that's very true. Kids aren't born angry. Something happens. And one of the things that, when we last spoke again, that really helped me, because I feel sometimes when people hear incredible stories like yourself, and you've probably heard this, people do this, they go, oh my goodness, that story is so incredible. I've got nothing to moan about in my life. I've got pain, but it's nothing like the pain that Terry went through. And I remember when we were talking last, you went, but Patrick, pain's pain. And actually, everyone has to deal with their pain in a different way. And comparing your pain to someone else's pain, which I guess is easy to do for all of us, isn't going to help anyone.
Well, I think there are so many different types of pain, aren't there? I think one of the very difficult types of pain to deal with today is mental pain. Pain caused by stress, by anxiety, by broken relationships. That's hard to deal with. And, you know, this is sometimes I had to deal with that type of pain by myself. But today, there is no need to deal with that pain by yourself. And one of the great functions of the church and of the collection of Christians together is that, put it in a scriptural term, bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Somehow, if you can find people with whom you can trust and with whom you can share, and that isn't easy. It is not easy to first of all, to face up to the reasons for your own pain. And certainly, you have to be able to trust. And you have to have trustworthy people, because we live in a world where trust is broken and where people can have very great difficulties as a result of that. But all I'm saying is, one way to deal with it is in a true, I use the term fellowship, which really the church ought to be a healing community. That's not its prime purpose, but it's a function of a community of people together.
Absolutely. I'd like you to tell us a bit about your books, because you've got them there, particularly the book Solitude, which I found absolutely fascinating. And Terry will be available at the back signing books, so I'd really recommend them. Not all his books are there. Taken on Trust isn't there, is it?
No, Taken on, what we've got there, we've got the book I've just quoted from. Now, it's a book of poetry and prose. It isn't just poetry. If you don't like poetry, then join the club, because I'm not keen on it either. But I have written a book, which has got poetry in it, and I've explained it explains different aspects of life with a narrative which explains it. And in fact, it's been illustrated by Jenny, who's at the back, who's illustrated this book. Then the book Solitude, which speaks about solitary places and solitary people. People who live in the outback in Australia, whom I went to visit, and who are somehow have discovered something which I think is so important. I've often said one of the keys to living is to be in harmony with yourself, to be in harmony with your neighbor, and to be in harmony with the environment. And today's age is one of disharmony. We're out of harmony with our environment, and we're paying a terrible price for that. We're out of harmony with our neighbors, and we're in warfare. We're often out of harmony with ourselves, and we're in illness. And somehow, I met people who've discovered the secret of being in harmony. And one of the stories, and the different stories in the book, one matron of a hospice who had been with goodness knows how many hundreds of people as they took their last steps out of this mortal life. And she speaks about that form of solitude, different forms of solitude. The other one is called Travels with a Primate, often miscatalogued, because the primate is not one of David Attenborough's primates, but is the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I travelled with him all over the world, and we travelled together, a wonderful sense of humour. And as you can imagine, funny things happened. Have I got time for one story?
Yep.
One story, all right. We were in Nigeria in the car together. This is one of the stories in the book. And as we were travelling along, thousands of people were crowding on either side of the car. And people had set up little booths, little stalls, where they were selling caps and knickknacks and souvenirs. And one man was selling balloons. And on the face of the balloon, he put a picture of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the Archbishop said, "Good heavens, look at that." And the slogan beneath the balloons was, "Support the Anglican Communion and blow up the Archbishop of Canterbury." So that's one of the stories. There are many other stories which I. And then what's the other one? The other one is when I was in COVID, I thought, let me try and let my imagination develop a bit. So I wrote a children's book, The Tales of Tommy Twitchnose, and that is about a mouse who lives in a converted barn, which belongs to Jenny and her husband, because one day they came home, they'd been away, and they discovered that the mouse had eaten her husband's slippers. And I thought, there's a story. So it's a story about small animals. But the purpose behind it, which is not obvious, but I'll tell you what the purpose behind it is. These animals, these little animals, the mice and the moles who built the Underground Railway, where they take people, other animals for trips on the Underground Railway, it's just to get across to children that animals have their own kingdom. They have a life of their own. And we need to respect them as well as the whole environment. And that's what lies behind that story. It's not made obvious, but it's there.
Amazing. And
I think that's it. Is that it? 1, 2, 3. Is there another one?
I don't know, to be honest, too. Sorry about that.
I've written several books anyway. Yeah. But anyway, I'll sign them. Anyway, I'll be glad to sign them if anybody wants any afterwards.
It's brilliant stuff.
Okay.
I guess one last question. I've heard you talk about being co-workers with Christ, co-workers of God, partners with God, as it's a relationship. Can you say a little bit about that for us?
About what? Sorry.
Being co-workers with God.
Oh, yes. Yes. I think when it comes to the miracle that is creation, and the more you discover about natural science and about creation, the more you realize it is a miracle, really. It's absolutely remarkable. And somehow we think, or some people think, of God being way out there, almost manipulating, creating. And I'm not sure that's really a helpful image. I think a much better image of that is that we are co-creators with God. We are responsible, not just for ourselves, not just for each other, but for the environment too. We create. And so often, we allow the negative side to take over and we destroy. And that is unfortunate, that is terrible. And somehow if we can get across the idea to each other and to ourselves that we have a full and responsible role in creation, and we're constantly moving forward in creation along with God. And one final thing I think I would say about that, and it's about the church, it's about structures, it's about doctrine, it's about dogma. I was very glad myself that I was brought up in a church with a definite structure, with creeds and with the readings from the Bible and the Psalms, all that goes with it. But the structure is not the essence. And so often in our disputes and arguments amongst Christian people, we're arguing about the structures, not about the essence. And somehow that's where we need to hold on to, because life really is a mystery. And God is a mystery. And part of the journey of life, I think, is for each one of us to grow closer to that mystery which lies within and beyond, and closer to God in that process. And if you say, I now fully understand, God is no longer a mystery. And it's a joy, is it not, to be able to have that constant exploration and constant discovery until we finally depart this life.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you thank Terry Waite for being with us this afternoon?